So really, how good is Penn State's defense? We look at how explosive they are and what they did in the Big Ten, but what does that really mean? Anyway, stick around. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Stephen Willis, and I'm likely the only person that you're going to hear from today that has had an office in the Manning Center at Ole Miss and has worked in the national media for Yahoo Sports. Thank you very much for joining us. Also did a little stint at WSMV in Nashville as well. Today on the show, we talk about how good Penn State defense is really. Caden Prieskorn is coming back to school, and we get to know Kewan Lacey, the high school running back from Texas, who kind of is going to be the storyline grabber as signing day approaches in a couple of weeks. As I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers that make the show what it is. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That is why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. So, Penn State's defense is statistically one of the best defenses in the country, and the top defense are one of the top defenses in the Big Ten. They're really good. They give up about 223 yards rushing. Statistically, you would think you're going into playing Georgia 2019, Georgia 2020, 21. That is what you think you're going into. But as you dig into it a little bit more, it's a little bit different of a story. Now, I'm not saying that, oh, that's Big Ten football, we're SEC football. I'm not playing that game right now, but there does need to be some differences between the SEC and the Big Ten. The conference are constructed different ways, which is going to affect things like statistical and analytical analysis. It's one of the reasons I hate analytics, is because it's so subjective depending on what's going on. You're so much at the mercy of your environment that whenever you just analytically look at defensive scoring efficiency in the Big Ten and compare it to even back in the day, the Big 12, you didn't actually look and get a good look at what the defensive scoring efficiency was, because the two leagues are so different. So there's a lot of apples and oranges in college sports, and honestly, that's one of the reasons we like it. But Penn State's defense is explosive. This season, 48 sacks, number one in the country. Number 2 in tackles for loss. If you remember when Ole Miss played Texas A&M, Texas A&M was number 1 in sacks, number 1 in tackles for loss. Very explosive defense. I think that is probably the comp that I would put out as the Penn State defense is the Texas A&M defense. I do not think Penn State's defense is as good as Alabama's. I do not think that Penn State's defense is even as good as Georgia's. I do think that statistically, Penn State has a better defense than both of them, but I'm talking about practically as well. I do think Penn State compares favorably with Texas A&M, the way it sits right now. But that was before all the mess happened. Chop Robinson, the best player on Penn State's defense, by far the best player on Penn State's defense, a top 10 draft pick, opted out this bowl game. He is going pro, and Manny Diaz left the Penn State Nittany Lions for the Duke Blue Devils, meaning that Penn State does not have a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator on the team that they started the season with. So the staff has a little bit of turmoil as well. Now, there's still some good players on that side of the ball. And like I said, if I'm comparing you to Texas A&M, I am not disrespecting your defense, so don't even play that game. I do not think, though, that this defense is going to be as good as Alabama and Georgia's. Now, if you look at the Big Ten defense, this is the setup in points per game. On the right column, on the far right, you look at it, Michigan gave up 9 points a game, Ohio State's 11, Penn State 11.4, Iowa 13.2, Nebraska 18.3, Wisconsin 18.9. If you look at it, that's 6 teams right there underneath 20 points. And it's like, okay, This is a really good defensive conference. This is what they built it on. There's obviously some there with the defense conference. But if you go to the offensive side of the ball, these are the offenses they faced. Now, Penn State's leading the conference in offense and scoring per game. But if you remember against Michigan and Ohio State, they looked completely inept. Ohio State and Michigan are pretty good, but after that, it drops way off a cliff. Now, to put this in perspective, not one of these offenses are as good as LSU, Georgia, Alabama, and probably potentially Missouri and Ole Miss. Those 5 teams would be the top 5 teams on this list offensively. Now, I get scoring percentage and all that, but if you just look at the offense, if you take the Ole Miss LSU game, the Ole Miss Alabama game, and the Ole Miss Georgia game to where you went up against really elite offenses and just brought them down to average. I'm not even saying shutting them out or don't play them. Just a 24-point, 30-point type game, a Big Ten type score. Ole Miss has given up 16 to 17 points per game defensively. So whenever you look at these points per game and these scoring efficiencies, keep that in mind. Penn State at this point has not seen an offense similar to LSU. They have not seen a Georgia. They have not seen an Ole Miss. They have not seen a Missouri. And I don't think they've seen an Alabama. Nobody wants to see an Alabama right now. So take that into consideration when you look at the scoring numbers and stuff from Penn State. Everything in the Big Ten is set up to play defense. Everybody does it. You look up there with the weather and everything. Once you hit November, it slows really far down. Penn State offensively, we saw them against Michigan and Ohio State. Now, granted, elite super athletes for Michigan and Ohio State, not taking anything away from them. Penn State's offense struggled, and not just struggled really hard. Penn State's elite defense against Michigan. Michigan just didn't throw the ball in the second half because they didn't have to. They ended up winning that game, going through. There wasn't blowouts in the Big Ten because offensively, they don't blow out teams in the Big Ten. Everything is structured to protect your defense. So the thing that Ole Miss needs to do against Penn State is get the tempo rolling. This will be the first team that has played with tempo at a level that Penn State has seen. They're not going to necessarily just muscle memory back to what's going on. You're doing this without a coordinator. All of this going into a massive tempo situation. Now, Ole Miss's offense, this is the flip side of that. Ole Miss's offense, in a lot of ways, is similar to a service academy. And everybody's like, well, Steve, they don't run the triple option. No, but this offense is a very hard one, the tempo and everything to prepare for in 1 week. If you got 4 weeks, it gets a little bit easier. So Ole Miss does need to have a good game plan on top of the tempo and the other stuff going on to attack this Penn State defense. But I would compare this defense favorably with the Texas A&M defense. I think that is the model. Ole Miss put up 500 yards on that Texas A&M defense. But Texas A&M's defense was good. And 16 points offensively, if you look at the way offenses both are in both the SEC and the Big Ten, 16 to 17 points a game is probably the equivalent of 11 in the Big Ten because of how the teams play. Tempo, the offense, the whole 9 yards. So we'll see exactly how that goes. I think Penn State has a really good defense. I think defense is probably going to be the 3rd or the 4th best defense that Ole Miss has seen this year. And that doesn't mean that Penn State can't stop Ole Miss. Penn State could absolutely rise up and stop Ole Miss. Mississippi State, for lack of a better thing, did a decent job against Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl. But as it sits right now, I don't think Ole Miss is going to see anything that they haven't seen, especially with Chop Robinson not on the field. That is going to be a little bit of a blessing because Penn State's strengths kind of attacked Ole Miss's weaknesses in the pass rush game, and that could have been a problem. Chop Robinson being out is going to be interesting to see as well. Anyway, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. We're just getting started. Another Rebel has said he is staying in the SIP and he was thought the least likely to do it. So welcome back, Caden Prieskorn. We'll tell you all about it next. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top 10 candidates, top tier candidates as possible as interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Quality candidates, that's the whole thing. If you hire the right candidate, it's the same as hiring the right football coach. If you hire the right guy, he's going to have you in the conversation for the playoff at a relatively quick order. If you have the wrong candidate, you're going to be making a new football coach in 3 years. If you hire the right one for your team, it can completely take off. But if you have the wrong one, you're going to be doing this again in 3 weeks. LinkedIn just isn't another job board. It has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 80% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing many hats, and you might not have the time or resources to hire. So thankfully, LinkedIn, this process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even launched a new feature that helps you write job descriptions and such to make the job even a little bit easier and quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports streaming channel. All right, so little inside baseball, what's going on. My mother is in town. I've already talked about that, and I appreciate all the well wishes for everybody, but that's, causing a different schedule. And sometimes I record noonish, one-ish the day before it actually airs. So sometimes news breaks after the fact, and that happened with Caden Prieskorn yesterday. We did a show about Jordan Watkins, mentioned Caden Prieskorn as being the least likely to come back, honestly. And then Caden Prieskorn comes back. I honestly expect Ole Miss to do the same thing in the next couple of days with Tre Harris and Jaxson Dart and Quinshon Judkins and all those guys, because that's just the way this is going to work. But we'll see exactly how that happens. Caden Prieskorn, though, is coming back to school, and this is a big pickup for Ole Miss, like a really big pickup. He had 20 catches for 313 yards, 2 touchdowns. He averaged 15.6 yards per reception as a tight end. He's going to be taking his, his next senior year. He's 6'5", 255 pounds. He's a heck of a run blocker. I mean, he is a plus run blocker on Ole Miss's offensive line. Just look at the projection of Quinshon Judkins before and after he got healthy to see exactly what he can do. Little number 86 tight end, staying in the SIP. This is a big deal. This really is a big deal. And you're talking about an offense that is going to be really, really explosive, especially with the addition of Deion Smith. I talked about yesterday how Mississippi State is probably making some recruiting bones in this cycle, recruiting against playing time at Ole Miss because of how good the recruiting room is, the wide receiver room is. And you still have good players. They're going to be fine, but it's going to be interesting to see how the play count is divvied up, because Deion Smith, like I said, is probably one of the best wide receivers in the Southeastern Conference day one. You have Tre Harris potentially coming back. I'm feeling better by the moment on Tre Harris. And if something's happened by now, if the Grow Collective dropped another graphic, I'm not going to be completely surprised by that at all. And you have, Jordan Watkins coming back, who's just a monster in the slot. So him and Caden Prieskorn, the middle of the field's kind of taken care of. And you replace a Dayton Wade, who's a good football player. I enjoyed him all season long. Replace him with a Deion Smith. And then behind him, you have Braylon Brown. You have Aiden Williams. You have even J.J. Henry. You have Caden Lee. You have people behind him, Larry Simmons, players like that they're going to get their opportunity eventually, but this room is going to be actually deeper than it's been in a long time, even though they're probably going to play about the same amount of numbers. That's just what it is. They play starters at Ole Miss, and the starters get a large number because of the tempo and the style that they play. Just kind of is what it is. So we'll see. There's still 3 players and 3 names that we want to see come back. And like I said, somebody could pop today, honestly, or yesterday before the show airs, and this could already be out of sync. But we're still waiting on Tre Harris. We're still waiting on Quinshon Judkins, and we're still waiting on Jaxson Dart. And these are my opinions on them. Okay. I think that right now, Tre Harris might be the next one. Walker Jones kind of cryptically tweeted this in the middle of the night, replying to a fan, basically insinuating that Tre Harris might be next. I've talked about for weeks that Tre Harris was about 70% coming back, had that on good authority. I might be looking at bumping that up. That this tells me I probably need to bump that up a little bit. So I'm pretty excited about Tre. Jaxson Dart is the other player, another player that we're waiting to officially announce what's going on. But here's the thing with Jaxson Dart. Jaxson Dart basically helped close Deion Smith. He was on campus and talking to Juice Wells. Jaxson Dart is recruiting way too hard for a player that's not coming back. He deserves the right to announce it and does all of that stuff, but I don't think anybody needs to necessarily worry about Jaxson Dart moving forward. And then you have Quinshon Judkins, who you haven't heard much about. And anytime there is a vacuum of information of people talking about it, it gets filled up with something. That's just the way this works. So they're going to freak out all the time about that. I think the Ole Miss Collective, the Grove Collective, is healthy as we sit right now. And I think Ole Miss is kind of going all in this season. They're going all in to try and stack their roster as best they can to make a run. This is that baseball team that is in the middle of their young core. They've just matured, and now they've got 2 or 3 years to try and figure it out and do whatever they can do. So they go out and get free agents. They go out and do whatever they can to make their roster as dangerous as they can make it. Ole Miss, it seems like it's kind of doing that right now. Ole Miss is a legit playoff contender in 2024. If you have 1 year left of school, why would you go anywhere else? You have a chance to make decent money, play in the playoffs, and win a ton of games. And that is a situation that Ole Miss has not been able to offer until the last couple of years. And now with the addition of the playoff, they can really offer that stuff. So that is interesting to me how that goes. I think the Grove Collective, they're doing, for lack of a better words, a bit. They released Jordan Watkins on, what was that, Saturday maybe? Or was it Sunday? Yeah. Saturday. Caden Prieskorn was Sunday. Who's going to be Monday? We'll find out. That'll obviously be talked about on tomorrow's show. But those 3 big names are still out kind of floating around. Obviously, JJ Pegues is returning as well. That is a big deal because Ole Miss, for better or worse, depending on what you believe, Ole Miss appears to be in the mix with Walter Nolan. Now, there's rumors going all around. Like I said, a vacuum is going to be filled. But on the Oregon visit, apparently it was being known that Ole Miss was one of the schools that was interested in it. So Oregon and Ole Miss, Jerry Hamilton talked about early in the process. We'll see what happens. Ole Miss is not going to get all of these kids. If Ole Miss doesn't get one of them, don't freak out. This is the way this works. There's a lot of good schools for it to happen. We do know that Ole Miss is going to get at least one of them with the addition of Chris Paul, and they're going to fight for other positions as well. And the goal is to get as many as you can to make that run in 2024. And we're going to talk about that 12-team playoff for the better part of the next, 11 months, honestly. So be prepared for that as well. Really interesting stuff. Still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We look at the player that might be getting the most buzz as signing day approaches and why it looks like Ole Miss might beat Alabama again for a recruit. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers Stay Hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on this action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Be part of history. All right, Ole Miss is also doing some high school recruiting, and a player that's getting a ton of buzz as signing day approaches is Kewan Lacey, a running back out of Lancaster, Texas, and really, really good football player. He was a commitment to Nebraska for a while. He decommitted. Then he opened up his recruitment, Ole Miss, Alabama, and I think somebody else got involved. I forget that name real quick. But Kewan Lacey, it looks like he's trending Ole Miss. Apparently, he has a good relationship with Lane Kiffin. He has a good relationship with Kevin Smith. And I have to say this, and I have said this a lot of times when looking at an Ole Miss player. Let's go to the highlights real quick and see exactly what it looks like. The first thing that you notice with Kewan Lacey is pretty elite vision. He has excellent instincts to play running back. He always seems like he's running to space. You don't see him running into back of offensive linemen. He is a good player with excellent balance, and he's hard to bring down to the ground. The second thing is we talk about all the time elite lateral movement to where he can go sideways without seemingly slowing down. The last time that I was this excited for a running back, and this is no insult to Kedrick Riscano, who I think is a very good back to begin with, was Quinshon. When you watched Quinshon Judkins, you knew that something was different. Something was special with this running back. He was another 3-star back out of Pike Road, Alabama, by the way. So Kevin Smith has a type. He knows how to identify, and Ole Miss running backs are the beneficiary of that. You look at Kewan Lacey, it just instinctual, all of the stuff. He even lined up at wide receiver and caught the ball downfield. Good hands. He is a potentially, for lack of a better word, a 5-tool back in Ole Miss's running back. He's a 3-down guy. So we'll see exactly what happens. And competition, if he enrolls early and signs with Ole Miss, will be steep. And him and Kedrick Riscano and Ulysses Bentley and those guys competing for the same thing, you're having a point to where whenever Ole Miss puts reserves into the game, you're not going to have that much of a drop-off. You're going to have guys that want to play. You're going to have guys that want to make a name for themselves. They want to take advantage of the opportunity. And all of a sudden you have a situation like it was when, heck, Jalen Hurts got pulled against Ole Miss and Tua came in and like, who is this guy? I mean, that is a situation that Ole Miss is building. I mean, the talent level in the wide receiver room, the running back room, the quarterback room. Now they need some work done on the offensive line. And they have some high school guys committed, but they're probably not stepping on the field year one. I think Bryson Sanders in year two, you're going to hear his name a little bit. I think Preston Cushman is going to rise in the next year, but I think Ole Miss is going to try and find some interior offensive linemen, plug and play guys in the transfer portal. And that is what's going to be really transforming this offense from a great offense to an elite offense. The difference is going to be just taking a step with what you saw this year, with being what LSU was, what Tennessee was. Those type offenses are going to be at Ole Miss's disposal if you can recruit those interior offensive linemen. And then you have the backs you can have a three-headed monster real similar to what, Jerry Neely and Henry Parrish and Snoop Connor had in the first 2 years under Lane Kiffin, with honestly Judkins, Bentley, and either Riscano or Lacey. So you'll see a situation, I think, where this offense really starts to take off. I'm really fired up about this back. I'm probably more fired up about this recruit than any other non-defensive line recruit on Ole Miss's commitment list at the moment. Keywan Lacey is an unbelievable talent at running back. And honestly, his ranking should be bumped up, but I don't lose too much sleep over stars whenever they're kind of on the cusp. I mean, he is a big game, in an all-star game from being bumped up to a 4-star. That doesn't change what he is right now. It's all a subjective thing, but this is a good running back. I feel pretty good about how I broke him down and where he sits as a talented player. I mean, you have him, you have Anthony Maddox, you have, I think Charleston Collins is sticking with Arkansas. They just got their collective organized and things like that. So they probably are able to fix some things. So that probably is why Charleston Collins they were able to save that as well. But Ole Miss is going to big game hunt. There's going to be a player, as Brian Smith has said, on signing day that you had no idea that Ole Miss was even recruiting. And the transfer portal is going to be really, really open. And right now it's going really, really well. So we'll see exactly how that goes. But thank you very much for tuning in. And tonight, Shark Tank Live, about 6:30 p.m. Central Time. I'm just going to say about-ish. We'll have about 30 minutes of that. We're not going to have Dalen, as you saw. There was no Monday night show. Dalen's in New York. But after Tuesday, it should start to get back to normal, and we're going to move into like pre-bowl game coverage, because I think Ole Miss is 18 days away from the Peach Bowl at this point. So we'll see what goes on there. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day as we get into recruiting mindset with the portal and high school recruiting all week until signing day, all of that stuff. Next week, we will look at how these are officials that will be set up are going to go. We'll continue to talk about the ones that just happened. And tonight we'll have Shark Tank Live at about 6:30-ish Central Time. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today for a 24/7 streaming channel covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national sports covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. For those of you on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Hotty toddy.